So this is a presentation that I prepared for much for of my own understanding when I was reading the paper on full duplex radios, a highly cited paper by the following authors. And now I'm going to explain the contents of the paper, or rather, I will try to give out what I understood out of the paper. Let's go. Before understanding what full duplex radios actually are, we must first understand how Wi-Fi works. So, what happens with the Wi-Fi is it uses a single channel that is of 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz frequency to communicate. And a common Wi-Fi radio works in half duplex mode. That is, the data at one point of time can only go in one direction. That is, if we have two devices A and B communicating with each other over Wi-Fi, then at one point of time only A can send the message and B can receive it, or B can send the message and A can receive it. It cannot happen that both A and B are transmitting the messages simultaneously and receiving it. So this is half duplex communication. Now, what are full duplex radios? As in, what is full duplex communication? Here, the information can flow in both the directions at the same time, which means now both radios A and B can simultaneously transmit as well as receive the signal. This is much like the telephonic conversation that we have these days, where both the people talking to each other can simultaneously hear as well as speak, and there is no lag or choppiness in their communication. Now, this full duplex communication has higher throughput compared to half duplex. Now, there comes our new term which is not familiar to most of us initially, that is throughput. Throughput is defined as the rate of message delivery over a communication channel, and it is usually measured in bits per second, as in how much data is being transferred per second. So here we can transfer more data per second, and in half duplex it should be, if the full duplex system is implemented ideally, then in half duplex system the throughput should be exactly half of full duplex of that of full duplex. Moving on, what is the paper's claim to fame? The paper gives a single antenna design for simultaneous transmission and reception on a single channel. Now, what's special in this way is that it uses the same resources as a standard half duplex system. So, what they are trying to do is implement full duplex communication system while using the resources of a half duplex communication system, which is quite good. And the second thing is, and to be able to implement full duplex communication, they are introducing novel analog and digital cancellation techniques which cancel the self interference to the receiver noise floor. Again, we encountered two new terms which are not known to us in general, which are self interference and receiver noise floor. I'll come to self interference in a bit, but first let's tackle receiver noise floor. What happens is, for an antenna, there's a threshold only above which the antenna is able to receive signals. And this threshold is set by the background noise level, as in the signal that the antenna is trying to receive should have higher strength when compared to the background noise level. And this background noise level is called the receiver noise floor. You see, it forms a floor like thing, and you have to be higher than the floor. I guess you understand. Now, coming to self interference, I have written a definition over here that it is a phenomena where a radio transmitter and receiver operating on the same frequency simultaneously interfere with each other. It can be further illustrated using this figure. Here, the purple region, one purple region symbolizes one antenna, the receiver antenna and transmitter antenna, just for depiction sake, they are part of a single thing. So what happens is, when an antenna is simultaneously transmitting as well as receiving the signal, then that signal that is being transmitted interferes with the signal that we intend to receive. So the signal that we intended to receive is not received, but we receive something else, which was distorted by that signal that we were transmitting. So in essence, we ourselves are creating a problem in our reception. And this is the key challenge that has to be solved in order for us to achieve full duplex communication. Now, before understanding anything else, we need to get our concept of the two important definitions of dBm and dB. So dB stands for decibels. Here, dBm is a unit of level used to indicate the power level of a system. As in, when the power level of signals go down, then we use this dBm unit to symbolize, I mean, to illustrate, or maybe how should I put it? Uh, we use this unit to give the power level of that signal. Because if we use the regular watt term, then there will be a prefix of order maybe 10 to the power minus 6, minus 7, and that kind of thing. And we don't want that. We want a regular whole number of a small whole number. So we use this unit, that is dBm. So for to calculate the power of a signal in dBm, uh, we use this formula where x is equal to 10 log 10 p by 1 milliwatt, as in the term inside the logarithm should be dimensionless. Hence, we have to put the power in milliwatts and we get the required power in dBm. Now, coming to dB. dB is the ratio of signals on the logarithmic scale. Ratio of powers of signals on the logarithmic scale, which means that when we are trying to, let's say, define the difference between the power levels of two signals, we use this term. It's just the ratio of power of two signals in the logarithmic scale. That's it. Now, another new term that we have to learn is signal to noise ratio. Now, signal to noise ratio is defined as power of the signal divided by the power of noise, which means that how high is the power of the signal when compared to the power of the noise present in the environment. And in the decibel scale, this signal to noise ratio can also be written as power of signal in decibels subtracted by the power of noise in decibels. This definition is going to be really important further on, so cling on to it. Now, what the problem that we are trying to solve, that is full duplex, is a hard problem. And here's why. Self interference is 10 raised to power 11 times stronger than the received signal, which means that if you're trying to receive, say, signal of strength x, then the self interference itself is x times 10 raised to power 11, which is super high. So if you do not cancel that self interference, you might not even be able to receive anything. So canceling that self interference is the key challenge here. Now, you might wonder that this self interference cancellation might prove to be a difficult problem. Then why undergo such hard trouble in the first place? Now, the reason for that is we currently use 4G in our day-to-day communication system. Also, some regions have even started receiving 5G, but it's a prior paper, so I'll talk about 4G. So, a 4G communication is full duplex in nature, but it uses two channels to achieve it, one channel for transmission and one channel for reception. Now, to for a company to establish a communication system, it has to acquire the spectrum, as in which frequency it is allowed to communicate. So the spectrum costs are quite high. The bidding for spectrum goes in hundreds of crores. The companies have to give that much money to government in order for them to use that spectrum for some agreed upon period of time. So the cost of acquiring spectrum is quite high, and for double channel full duplex you are going to buy two separate channels. And imagine the cost cutting that can be achieved if that same communication can be done using a single channel. So this is where full duplex shines. Now the second thing is the increasing saturation of the radio spectrum. That is, as more and more devices are coming online, more companies are coming in to facilitate communication. They are using up the radio spectrum, and we have left ourselves with very little space in that spectrum to be able to afford multiple channels. That's why full duplex is important. Use a single channel for transmission as well as reception. Moving on, what is the simple condition required for full duplex? It's quite simple in a way that I have motivated it. Completely cancel the self interference that results from its own transmission to the received signal. Just cancel the self interference and you are able to receive the signal. Now, let's see the numbers attached with it. The Wi-Fi signals are transmitted at 20 dBm average power. The noise floor is at minus 90 dBm. I've illustrated this in this diagram that I drew. This is some arbitrary reference line, and the noise floor is somewhere here. The transmitted signal power is here. Now we need to we need to bring the self interference to the noise floor level. So we need to have a cancellation of 20 minus of minus 90, that is 110 dBm. So bring that, this much is the self interference, bring this to noise floor level, because anyways we cannot receive anything below noise floor, so just cancel it up to the noise floor level. Moving on, for the attentive of you or maybe the curious ones, they may be thinking that there's an easy solution to that. When we are transmitting signal via antenna, what a simple thing that happens is you have the signal in the digital form, that is you have the information in the digital form, you convert into the analog form, and thereafter you transmit it using the antenna. So you already have the information that you are transmitting in the digital form. So why not simply subtract that information from the signal that you are receiving, and hopefully the thing works and you are able to receive the signal that you intended to receive. Turns out the deduction that we just made follows from an assumption that radio preserves the original baseband signal except for power scaling and frequency shifting. But unfortunately, this does not happen. A radio significantly distorts the signal being transmitted. It is shown in the diagram that here. I've I also have the diagram bit amplified here. Uh, Ignore the heading for a while. That if we are transmitting a signal of this kind, what we what the radio actually transmits is something of this sort on the right. And we also do an experiment to prove that. What we do is we transmit two extremely simple signals of frequency 2.449 gigahertz and 2.451 gigahertz, which is shown on the left. That what we think that we actually are transmitting these two peaks, which represent the power level of the two signals. Now, what the radio actually transmits is depicted on the right hand side, where you see the two peaks that we thought we were transmitting are there. They have their power level. But we also see these extra thingies, these extra harmonics. This is the way that radio distorts the signal. Now, there are, anyways, what we are transmitting is the cause of the self interference. So, this is the self interference. Whatever that we are transmitting is the self interference, and we need to cancel that in the signal that we are receiving. So, there are several components in the self interference. There are three of them actually. The first one is a linear component, which means that the these components can be expressed as a linear combination of the signals that we thought we were transmitting. Thereafter, there are non-linear components. These non-linear components consist of higher order terms such as x cube, x to the power 5, generated sorry generated by the radio circuits from input signal x. Thirdly, there's the transmitter noise. This corresponds to general increase seen in the base signal. All of these three types are also depicted in this diagram on the right hand side. These two are the things that we thought we were transmitting. The things represented this way are the harmonics which the radio induced on its own. These are the nonlinear components, and we see that the prior on to transmitting, the noise floor was present here at minus 90 dBm level. But after transmission, the noise floor has also shifted upwards. So the transmission has also increased the noise floor, which means now if we want to receive the signal, the signal that has to be received should have even higher power level, a loss for us. Now, what are the requirements for full duplex designs? Simply cancel any self-interference enough so that its power is reduced to the same level as the receiver noise floor. Canceling anything beyond that does not make sense. Now, what was observed was that the self-interference from the linear components is 110 dB, this much, and the self-interference from nonlinear harmonics has the power of 80 dBm. And okay, I should not say dBm because we are reporting the power levels with respect to the noise floor. So in effect, it's a ratio. So the linear components self-interference is 110 dB with respect to the noise floor level. Nonlinear harmonics have a power level of 80 dB, and the transmitter noise has a power level of 50 dB. And we need to cancel all three of these in order to achieve full duplex. Moving on. Come on. Yes. Now, what do we need to do? Simply cancel these three components. That is, cancel the 110 dB linear part, 80 dB nonlinear part, and cancel the transmitter noise. But how do we cancel transmitter noise? Because by definition, it is noise, and noise is random. We cannot model it with any system. So, what we do is we take a copy of it in the analog domain and cancel it there in the analog domain itself. You see, it has a power level of 50 dB with respect to the noise floor, but we are going to apply an analog cancellation of 60 dB. But why is that? Let's find out in the next slide. What happens is a signal, sorry, an antenna has a noise floor above which, as in, it receives signals which have power level greater than that noise floor. It also has a ceiling for the power level for the received signal being received to be, which is that ceiling is governed by the ADC resolution of that radio. So any signal which has higher power than that particular level will not get received, because after that level the radio gets saturated. So this level is governed by the analog to digital converter resolution, and in general what we see is that radios have ADC which typically have a resolution of 12-bit, but to be on the safer side we are doing our calculations by considering the resolution to be 10-bit, just to be on the safer side. Now, this 10-bit ADC gives us a theoretical dynamic range of 60 dB. There's a call sorry, there's formula to calculate this theoretical dynamic range. I'm not mentioning that here because it's not that important except for the value. So the maximum input signal is minus 90 plus 60, that is minus 30 dB. How did that come about? The highest power level that we were transmitting was 20 dBm, and the theoretical dynamic range is 60 dB. That is here, this much at this level, this much higher than the noise floor. Now, what we want to do is cancel the extra part that might cause the radio to saturate. And how much is that extra part? That is this much, which is 20 minus of minus 30, which gives us 50 dB. So this is the amount of part that we need to cancel. Again, the thing comes out to be 50 dB. Then why are we applying a cancellation of 60 dB? Because what happens is sometimes the signal that is being transmitted sees an abrupt bump in the power level by about 10 dB. So to account for that, we are applying an analog cancellation of 60 dB. Again, the final dynamics: 110 dB linear, 80 dB nonlinear, and 50 dB transmitter noise. All three of these have to be cancelled. Now, how do prior techniques fare? Because there must have been prior attempts at achieving full duplex radios. What were they? In order for us to truly appreciate the contributions in this paper, we must first understand what is the place that we are coming from. So, we are going to see two of the prior designs which were doing a fine job. So, These two, the key difference between the design proposed in this paper and their design is that the prior ones use at least two antennas for transmission and reception of signals instead of a normal single antenna, which is being proposed in this paper. Now, the first technique achieves an overall cancellation of 80 dB. The breakup is given here, and in this 80 dB, 50 dB is obtained in the analog domain by antenna separation. The two antennas which were transmitting and receiving the signals are physically separated 40 centimeters apart, and the two of them, they too are isolated using some sort of metal shielding to achieve this 50 dB of analog cancellation. Now, one thing to note is that analog cancellation applies to all three of the components that we saw earlier: linear, nonlinear, as well as the transmitter noise. So, whatever you cancel in the analog, you cancel every single component. No need to worry about it thereafter. This is what I wrote in this important box. Now, that was only 50. Thereafter, the 30 dB of cancellation is achieved using an extra transmit chain. What this transmit chain does is it injects an antidote signal into the receiving side, and this signal tries to cancel the self interference, and this is the amount of 30 dB is the amount of cancellation it is able to achieve. So the total cancellation is 80 dB. Now, what we wanted was the bar is at 110. So this first techniques falls short of the cancellation requirements by 30 dB. So not that great. Will not achieve full duplex communication, and these true full duplex communication. Moving on to the second technique. This technique achieves an overall cancellation of 85 dB. The breakup again is here shown here. In this 85 dB, 25 dB of analog cancellation is achieved using perfectly inverted copy of the signal using balloon. This is something special, that it uses a transformer which is called a balloon to get a perfectly inverted copy of the signal being transmitted. It's like destructive interference. We take that perfectly inverted signal, perfectly align it with the signal that is being transmitted, and add them both to cancel each other. But if that were to go 100% correct, we should have achieved full cancellation of the self interference. But that does not happen because aligning both the two signals exactly is a difficult task. Hence, we only achieve 25 dB of analog cancellation. Now, again, here too the antenna separation thing comes in, and they are able to achieve 30 dB of analog cancellation. Thereafter, they also achieve 30 dB of linear cancellation using a digital cancellation stage, where they, after receiving the signal, do some cancellation in the post processing way, where they converted the received analog signal into digital form, and thereafter they do some processing. So again, 85 was achieved, but it had to achieve 110, so it falls short of the requirement by again 25 dB. So this left out self interference, what will this do is it will increase the receiver noise floor by 25 dB. So again, bad for us as the noise floor is increasing. Again, will not be able to achieve true full duplex communication. Now, what is the proposed design? The design that is being proposed in this paper has two stages, that is, an analog and a digital cancellation stage. And using these two stages, it is able to achieve 110 dB of cancellation and is able to eliminate the self interference to the receiver noise floor. Back after a water break, let's see what the proposed design is. The first stage, that is the analog cancellation stage. This is a diagram of their whole implementation. Here, what we see is this is the part that is transmitting the signal. The signal goes this way. In between, they take some part of the signal for the analog cancellation, as I said earlier, because it has transmitter noise too, and that can only be eliminated in the analog domain. Now, for transmission, it goes from a circulator which has three ports, and this circulator provides a limited isolation between ports 1 and 3. So, limited isolation as in not all of the signal from port 1 can travel to port 3. It in the way attenuates 50 dB of it. So, circulator is providing us 15 dB of cancellation for free. Now, 95 dB of self interference is left to be cancelled thereafter. Moving on, now at least 45 dB of cancellation more has to come in analog because we had to cancel 60 dB and we already have achieved 15 dB. Now, a simple outline of what needs to be achieved after this is take a small copy of the transmitted signal and as in just tap it right before it is going to be transmitted or it is going to be passing through the circulator in this case, and the copy is then passed through a circuit which consists of parallel fixed lines of varying delays and tunable attenuators. What does that mean? We'll see after a point of time. So it passes through that circuit. The circuit has some delays and tunable attenuators. The attenuators attenuate the power level of the signal being transmitted. The lines are collected back from that circuit as there were several delay lines. The signal went through them, got distributed, and thereafter it gets collected back. Now the combined signal is thereafter subtracted from the signal that is being received on the receive path, that is port 3, as we see here. Now, a novel insight for this cancellation circuit is that this analog cancellation can also be seen as a sampling and interpolation problem. This is similar to what we do when we are trying to convert an analog signal to its digital form, where we first do a sampling and thereafter, using those sample points, we try to recreate that analog signal, which is usually done using sync interpolation. Now, if self-interference signal has delay D and attenuation A to the circulator, we pick the fixed delay such that they straddle the delay D. What this means is that after we have transmitted the signal will come in contact with the environment, and when it comes back, it might have suffered some sort of delay with respect to the signal that we had tapped right before the circulator. So, what we are going to do is if we have n fixed delays available with us, we will keep n by 2 of them with delay less than d at equal distant intervals, and we'll keep n by 2 of them with delay higher than this d value, as in we are straddling the delay d. And thereafter, we are going to implement the sampling and sync interpolation thing in effect. How do we do that? Here, what we do is clearly depicted in this picture. We take those. Do I have it? Hmm. We take those delayed versions. Oh, also, how do I find the value of the delay d? We do not have the exact value of delay d, but we do know that in which range the d value is going to be, and we place our n by 2 and n by 2 delays outside of that range. Now, what we do is we place sync functions on top of all the delayed versions, and thereafter add all of them to form our final signal, and which we have to subtract from the signal that is being received, depicted here in this diagram. But how many sync functions are we going to add this way? That is going to be a very large number. And to be able to do that perfect interpolation, we'll need a large number of delay lines. And what we know is in analog domain, the things that are used to carry out the operation are present in physical form. As in, the delay lines will occupy space. If we have more of them, we'll have to allocate more space to them. So, what we do to eradicate this problem is that we know that the signal which is much further away or much before the time t that we are focusing on will not have much effect on the value of that signal at that point of time t. So, what we experimentally found out was that 16 delay lines are sufficient to approximate the self interference leaking through the circulator. Keep 8 of them at delay less than d, and 8 of them at delay higher than d, and which finally brings our analog cancellation to this required 60 dB value, which again we had to achieve this much analog cancellation, this much non-linear, and this much linear. And analog cancellation applies to all three components. Now moving on to the second stage of our technique of cancelling the self-interference, which is digital cancellation. Now, going by the progress so far, we have eliminated the transmitter noise completely. We have eliminated 60 dB part of this 80 dB nonlinear component, and 20 of nonlinear remains, and 110 minus 60, that is 50 of linear remains. So we have to cancel 50 of the linear and 20 of the nonlinear components. How do we do that? Again, digital cancellation stage 2 has two parts to it. Cancellation of the linear components, cancellation of the nonlinear components. I guess that was pretty obvious. What we do is, for the cancellation of linear components, this self-interference can be modeled as a linear and non-causal function of the transmitted signal, as the signal is known in digital. What that means is, non-causal means we are trying to predict what is going to come to us. We do not know for sure what it is going to be, but we are going to model it because we know what it was in the digital form. and it must not have gone much change. As in, that was my own statement. I'm not saying that. Whatever change it might have gone, we are trying to model it. How do we do that? We do that using k samples of the digital form that we have, and we model it using this equation where y of n is the received sample and x of n is the known transmitted signal. So we are taking k samples of the known transmitted signal, and each sample is being multiplied by this coefficient, which is h of k and some delayed version of it. This represents the attenuations by the channel to the transmitted function, because whatever you are transmitting, the environment will cause some sort of attenuation to it, and by the time you reach it, its power level might have decreased. Might why might it will surely decrease. And w of n is the receiver noise floor, because we only receive signals which have power level greater than the noise floor of the receiver. Now, how do we estimate these coefficients? H of Hey, we do that again by employing a key insight that most wireless transmissions have known packet preambles, which means that, okay, packet preamble, again a term which most of us do not know initially. I did not. In a protocol like Wi-Fi, there's a set of bits that we transmit with the data that we are transmitting for sure, and it is known to us a priori. That is, we know that if transmission is taking place, we are also transmitting this fixed set of bits. So on the receiver side, we already know that this is going to be transmitted, and when we look for that in the signal that is received, if any kind of distortion is present in that uh, ideal form, from that distortion we are able to predict the environment's condition, which means the condition of the channel, uh, uh, which is how much distortion the channel is providing to the signal that is passing through it. I learned it in the signal systems and random processes course, which is taught by a prof, Cindy George. So, nice thing. I did not have to scramble the internet to learn this. Okay, moving on. Now we are going to do is we will say that xpr of n will represent the samples of the preamble, and from y0 to yn will be the received sample according to the preamble, as in they are corresponding to the preamble. So we can write y is equal to ah plus w. Now here again we encounter a new term, which is a. So a is the Toeplitz matrix of the samples of the preamble. It looks something like this. Again, there's a new term which is Toeplitz matrix. I will explain what it is. In this kind of matrix, what happens is all the diagonal elements in a single diagonal have the same value, as is seen here: A, B, 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 C, 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 D, D, E, and similar happens in other diagonals. So, to estimate h of n, our goal would be to find a maximum likelihood estimate of the vector h. That is, we are going to minimize the receiver noise floor, which is shown here using the second order norms squared of y minus h. In essence, we are minimizing the receiver noise floor. Now, in this calculation, since we already know the packet preambles, we can pre-compute the matrix A, which saves us some computation time when the things are actually taking place. And from a prior work, we already know that h can be figured out using this formula, which is it is a sigma of yi times ai of ai dagger. This sign is called dagger. I recently figured this out. So what this terms depicts is this is the ith column of the pseudo inverse of matrix A. Okay, some silly disturbance later. This A dagger AI thing represents the ith column of the pseudo inverse of matrix A. So as the samples come in, we multiply them and have a summation of them, and we get the coefficients h which we desire to have. I missed the slide. Okay. Now, coming to the second part of digital cancellation, that is the non-linear components cancellation. We are again trying to eliminate the 20 dB, which was residual of the 60 dB after the 60 dB analog cancellation. So again, point to note is that in why are we using analog cancellation? We are using it to cancel the nonlinear components, and uh, the nonlinear function that the transmitter might be applying is might be okay. I should say that it would be difficult to predict or get the information of it directly. So what we are going to do the typical way is to use a Taylor series expansion to approximate that nonlinear function. So again, we write that nonlinear function's output, which is the transmitted signal, using this formula, which is y of t is equal to sigma m till m am xp of t raised to the power m. Now, here xp of t is the ideal passband analog signal for the digital representation of x of n, because we know the signal that we are trying to transmit in the digital form, but we do not know what it is going to be in analog. So we assume our prior assumption, which I busted, that the analog version is exactly the same that we think it is going to be. So we are just what it was going to be is what we thought is xp of t, the ideal analog version. Now, again, we have to figure out more stuff here. If we take all the values, then it will be quite a cumbersome expression to calculate. So after taking Fourier transform is of this expression, we find out that only the odd order terms are the ones which have frequency in the region that we are trying to operate in. So we are only going to focus on the odd order terms. Now, we can reduce and write the above model in the digital passband domain. This is the line that is written. So after knowing that only odd order terms matter, we can further simplify the equation and write it in the following way, as is depicted here. Now, Hm of n here is the weight for the term which raises the signal to order m. It's a weight that is being applied, and k is the number of samples of significance for us in past and future. Not all samples matter to us, only some are able to influence the thing that we are interested in, and we are taking k of those samples from the past and k of those samples from the future. Now, how do we estimate the coefficients hm of n? Again a coefficient estimation problem. What we do is that Wi-Fi preamble again comes to our rescue. Here the Wi-Fi preamble, little information on Wi-Fi preamble. It consists of two OFDM symbols which are of length 8 microseconds, and assuming the sampling rate of 160 megahertz, we have total digital samples that is 1280. So we have 1280 digital samples of the Wi-Fi preamble. Now again, a key insight. That key insight is there is no need to evaluate all the terms that we found empirically. Why is that? Oh, on the left side is weird. I should be right. Hmm. I thought it's going to take care of itself. I don't think that's going to happen. There is no need to evaluate all the terms of this coefficient h of hm of n. Why is that? Let's find out. Because to illustrate that, let's consider a naive model where we are thinking that only first, third, fifth, seventh, ninth, and 11th order terms matter to us. And if we take 128 samples from past and the future, which are influencing the self interference at the point we are correction there must be at the point that we are looking at. The number of variables that have to be estimated will be 1536, and as we saw, we only have information worth 1280. So we have 1280 equations and we need to evaluate 1500 or so variables, which, as you know, is not possible. Number of variables to be estimated should not be greater than the number of equations available to us. So how are we going to estimate h of mn? Now after doing some experiments, we know empirically that not all terms matter to us, and most of the terms are zeros anyways. This is what we find out. So why are they zero? Because the higher order terms are created by mixing of lower order terms. This is depicted here in this graph. Here blue one is the main component, the red is symbolizes the third harmonic. As you can see, even the third harmonic has significantly lesser strength than the main component. The fifth harmonic has even lesser strength, and anything below the noise floor is valueless to us. So the higher order terms will not matter to us. So what we find out is that only 224 variables only are needed to be estimated, and to estimate them we have 1280 equations, which is a big number. We can easily figure this out. Now after figuring this out, what do? Apply these to recreate the harmonics, because anyways we are trying to model that the nonlinear output from that nonlinear function, and when we are able to model it, we just cancel the harmonics. Simple. Now, what is the total complexity of this digital cancellation? Uh, it's roughly equivalent to order of W, where W is the width of the preamble. You saw that we used that width twice in our calculations. So it's order of W. And width of the preamble is around 1280. So, but that may vary. That was just our calculation. Now, we applied. Wait, I'll take a small break. Now, we only applied the analog cancellation once, and that too with fixed values, but the environment is dynamic. The channel conditions may not be the same forever. So we also have to account for that. So we have to dynamically change the things, change the parameters of an analog cancellation circuit. And how do we do that? Oh, you might ask, this digital cancellation thing also might require this adaptation? No, it does not, because it estimates the distortion per packet basis. As in, packet comes, it evaluates the distortion and applies the cancellation thereafter. But that does not happen in the analog cancellation circuit. So it is vulnerable to changes. Now, in the analog cancellation, what we were doing is delay the signal and apply various attenuations. Okay, battery is low. Wait a minute. Hmm. Small change in location to plug in the laptop. Okay. Now, what we were doing for analog cancellation, delaying, getting a delayed version of the self interference by varied amounts, applying various attenuations to those delayed versions, and thereafter adding it up to get that self interference. Now, we have to pick the attenuation values such that the self interference is minimized. So, what we are going to do is tweak those attenuation values to achieve our outcome, desired outcome, of course. So that is depicted using this formula, that is minimize this down. And CT is the reference signal that was tapped from the transmit path. This is the thing that we transmitted right before the circulator, and Y of T is the self interference that we got. We can select using the changed adapted value of attenuation. Attenuators, should I say? Okay. CT from here, tapped signal, and we cancel it. These are the delays, these are the attenuators, and we are applying this control algorithm to set the values of these attenuators. Now, again, there's a simple solution to this problem, that we run iterative gradient descent algorithm, as is with any parameter estimation problem, but this gradient descent algorithm will require 40 milliseconds to converge. And if you are assuming that we carry out this retuning of analog cancellation every 10 milliseconds, then we are taking a 40% overhead, which is simply not acceptable. We do not have that much time. It will lead to delay, lag in the performance. Or it might not. I haven't verified. Take that thing with a pinch of salt. What? The delay thing. So what we do is, now that gradient descent directly is out of the picture, we seek assistance of the frequency domain. Here, we model the self-interference y of t in the frequency domain as the following formula or expression. We write y of f is equal to h of f times c of f. C of f is the frequency domain representation of the tapped signal. I just stated that. And h of f is the frequency domain representation of the distortion, the extra thing that came in to the signal that we transmitted. Now, apart from the distortion, the tapped signal is essentially a scaled replica of the transmitted signal input from the circulator. Simple, we tapped it earlier. Thereafter, the distortion was added. So, that is the reason that we are able to write this expression. Now, again, we do not know HF here, H of F. How do we find that? We take the FFT of self-interference channel, and how do we do that? Using the Wi-Fi preamble. Recall that I told you that we can get the channel condition using the Wi-Fi preamble. So we do that and we obtain H of F. Now again, new problem comes in that we pick the attenuator values such that overall frequency response of the cancellation approximates H of F. Right? Now we have to get to this H of F thing. And how do we get there? By minimizing this expression. If we get there, we are able to do this. And again, for this minimization problem, there are two parts to it. Measure individual frequency response of all the delay lines for all values of A. Because the frequency response for a given delay line varies with the amount of attenuation it has. And a delay line has 128 different values of attenuation, at least in this case. Thereafter, search for the best possible attenuation for each delay line. In this, if we have how many delay lines? 16 delay lines. All 16 of them have 128 possibilities. That's 16 times 128 possibilities. That's a lot. Okay. Now, how do we measure the frequency lines? Come on. Frequency response of the delay lines. Seems like an impossible task because the entire circuit is well connected. How do you get the frequency response of that single delay line? A simple solution is that we measure the frequency response of delay line at one attenuation value. We do that somehow. I'll tell you. And use something called S parameter to extrapolate the frequency response for all attenuation values. So this S parameter thing is something new. It provides the relative change in frequency response with change in attenuator value for a specific attenuator, which means if we know the attenuator's value for frequency response for one given attenuation value, we can then extrapolate it and get the frequency response for other attenuation values as well. So how do we get that one value? We do that using a small trick. The trick is that except for the line that we want to measure the attenuation of, we set the attenuation of all the other delay lines to their highest setting so that they do not or transfer minimal amount of signal through them, so that most of the signal is transmitted using the line that we are currently focusing on. But you see, the Lines cannot have an infinite attenuation, so the method is only an approximation. So to be extra sure, we also apply a second least squares fit to get a more accurate response. What we do is collect more data and use that data to get a better value. And the good thing is that all of this has to be done only once, because the attenuator values and their frequency response do not change. So we can do this beforehand and not have to worry about it again. Now, how do we use these attenuator values to minimize this expression? First and foremost, measure the frequency response of the self-interference h of f. You get that h of f first. Solve the equation by relaxing it to a linear program and use random rounding. I am not proficient with what they are talking about, but take it as it is for now. Then, the good part of our approach here is that we are only looking for a point that satisfies our requirement, that it achieves 60 dB of analog cancellation. We are not looking for the absolute best possible analog cancellation here. Just give us what we want and we are happy. So we get there and happy. And by the time that happens, we have only used a a small amount of computation. And after doing that, we apply an additional gradient descent step. And since we already have gotten so close to that low value, this gradient descent step converges pretty quickly. That is only 10 to 12 iterations. And we get the lowest possible attenuation. Now, there's a whole analog cancellation tuning can take around 900 to 1000 microseconds. And considering that we do this tuning every 100 milliseconds, this is a fair number, a fair amount of time, so that the channel conditions does not change much. This is less than 1% overhead for tuning, which is quite good. So, coming to this all was the theoretical part. This is being implemented, but how does the implementation look like in the real world? At least in the laboratory setting, this is how it looks. This is the receiver, transmitter, it has an antenna, and the analog cancellation circuit looks something like this. At least now we know how it looks. Physical stuff gives us the meaning. This is why at least I do things. Now, coming to evaluation, did we actually achieve what we promised to do so in the first slide? Let's see. This graph shows us the CDF of throughput for full duplex link using these parameters. Transmit power is 20 dBm, the bandwidth is 80 megahertz, which is the specification for Wi-Fi. And as you can see, compared to the other methods, we see a median gain of 80% using full duplex when compared to half duplex. It was supposed to be 100%, but there's some self interference still remaining, and we are only able to reach to that 87% value, which is quite a good number, in my opinion. Now, coming to the conclusion, finally, the things that were described in this paper are only a physical layer experiment. A full Mac design, which is with multipliers and adders, is beyond the scope of this paper. As in the actual implementation, I guess they have not given that to us. I do not have full understanding of this. And what this paper shows us is that full duplex is possible as well as it's feasible. They achieved it. What is the case here is the size of the circuit is 10 by 10 centimeters. So, in its current state, it cannot be used in devices such as mobile phones and other mobile appliances of that sort. And currently, it is being operated in the SISA mode, that is single input, single output. And to be able to use MIMO here, this is multiple input and multiple output, we have to take care of the crosstalk as well, where the antennas also affect each other. So this they say that they are working on this problem right now, at least when they wrote that paper. And now I know that they have already published it. Maybe I'll read that after I'm done with this presentation. Yes. Now, another thing that they point out is the problem is one that is interdisciplinary in nature, as in it spans three different disciplines: RF circuit and system design, digital signal processing, as well as networking. So, all three of these kind of people have to come together, or at least, or maybe if one person is smart enough, then he'll have to learn all three of these fields in order for this full duplex problem to be solved. And if this problem is solved, we will be able to save huge amount of money. Win-win situation and happiness for the person who is able to make it happen. Bye. Lot of talk for a day.